You've turned Dad's life and our lives into a nightmare. Violet and Xander slowly made their way down the stairs together at the call of their mother, Ursula. There, in the hallway, standing with a suitcase, was a man they both couldn't stand. "Violet, Xander, welcome David," Ursula said excitedly. "As I was saying, he's going to be part of our family now." "Mom," Violet replied dismissively, "you haven't even finished divorcing Dad yet." "Well, fortunately, I will soon," said her mother firmly, displeased that the children did not share her excitement. "Don't you think that's a little inappropriate?" Violet didn't give up. "Violet!" Ursula shouted angrily at her daughter. "Is that his car?" Xander asked dismissively, looking at the familiar car in the driveway. "I thought you said this guy was successful." "Dad bought himself a Mercedes SUV, the best in its class. That's pretty cool." "Good to see you kids again," David said somewhat awkwardly after Xander's not-so-kind comparison of Xander to his dad. "Yeah, I'm going to change my car, too. I'm expecting a promotion at work, so we'll have that opportunity soon." Neither Violet nor Xander looked impressed. A tense silence hung in the air. "Welcome, David, to our home," Ursula hissed at her children, angered by their rudeness. "Yes, whatever you say," Violet said unkindly, walking off upstairs. "They just need a little getting used to," Ursula reassured an upset David. "I'll talk to them. They'll come around." Violet, 16, and Xander, 12, had learned of their parents' divorce 6 months earlier when they had been informed of their mother's infidelity. This was after 2 years of watching their parents fight, their mother's coldness towards their father, Gary, her swearing at him. She used any excuse to be away 24 hours a day, regular weekends and holidays with her girlfriends, trips to see family, and the like. It got to the point that even the children did not believe their mother. It was painful for them to see their father losing his self-respect while desperately trying to save the marriage. Their parents sought marriage counseling, but always David loomed behind the scenes. When Ursula wasn't home, they would hear their father sobbing at night. After 2 years, Gary finally broke down. He found evidence of her affair before filing for divorce and blamed David. Both parents sat down next to their children to explain why they were separating. Xander cried and Violet stared at her mother with poorly concealed hostility. Ursula refused to make eye contact with her children, feeling uncomfortable. She tried to give her husband equal responsibility, but it didn't work because no one believed her. All she could offer was that she had fallen in love with someone else. What followed was an agonizing 3 months while Gary searched for a place to sleep. Ursula was relieved when he moved out. It didn't really make life at home any more pleasant. Both Violet and Xander were pretty pissed off at their mother, who was too infatuated with David to notice. Once the divorce proceedings started after Gary moved out, it became bitter as the love between Gary and Ursula was completely lost. Gary sued for full custody of the children and the house. Ursula fought back and demanded increased child support, a house for which Gary had to pay the mortgage, and the ability to control her father's meetings with the children. The divorce took 6 months to finalize. What the nonchalant judge ruled was unsatisfactory to everyone. Gary had to pay his half of the mortgage until Ursula remarried, if ever, as well as child support. Custody was complicated by the children's age difference. Violet was deemed old enough to choose which parent to live with, but Xander was not. It was decided that Xander would stay at the family home with Ursula during the week and spend the weekends with his father. Violet reluctantly decided to do the same for her brother. She cried in her father's arms when she told him about it. Gary similarly, tearfully told his daughter that he was proud of her for her concern for her brother. Her parents' divorce brought Violet and Xander closer together, especially because Violet was forced to study with her brother while her mother continued her affair with David. A month after the divorce, Ursula invited Violet and Xander over for dinner to meet David for the first time. It didn't take the kids long to realize who David was. "Violet, Xander, this is David. The man I'm dating, Ursula said proudly, squeezing David's hand. You mean this is the guy you cheated on Dad with? Violet grinned. Xander slouched in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest, and looked away sullenly. Violet! Ursula shouted, looking around to see if anyone had heard her daughter's words. It's all right, Ursula. David smiled embarrassedly, though he didn't like Violet's dismissive directness. I wish your mother and I had met under different circumstances. But when you're older, you'll realize that love doesn't always work the way you want it to. Yes, Daddy learned that the hard way, Violet replied. Anger flashed across David's face, and Ursula did her best to contain her rage. Xander, I hear you're a pretty good baseball player, David said cheerfully to Xander, trying to change the subject. Yeah, I'm okay, Xander replied sullenly, not looking at David. Maybe you and I could play a game, David suggested, smiling. Ursula happily agreed. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it, Xander? Thank you, David. Nope, was all Xander said. David and Ursula's smiles faded. The atmosphere at the table grew hot with Violet's hostility, Xander's sullenness, David's disappointment, and Ursula's latent anger. The meal was eaten in silence, and dessert was refused by both children who couldn't wait to leave. That was extremely rude of you, Ursula said angrily to the children, taking them home. David has tried very hard to get to know you, and you disrespected him publicly. I don't like him, Xander said from the back seat. I can't believe you left Dad for him, Violet added. Daddy is so much better in every way. Ursula brushed away a tear and began to look visibly upset. If you just give him a chance, you'll love him as much as I do. He's such an amazing person. Neither Violet nor Xander said anything back. Back home, Violet and Xander immediately went to their rooms, leaving their mother tearfully calling David to apologize for the kids. Dad, you can't leave it like this, Violet yelled at her father in frustration when she told him about her meeting with David. You have to tell Mom that we don't want to know him. No, I'm not thrilled about it either, Gary replied irritably, before switching to a calmer tone to reassure his daughter. But this day had to come. There's nothing I can do about it unless he hurts you. You'll have to see him a lot more often, I think. Unfortunately, that's up to your mother to decide. Gary's intuition was correct. Ursula had convinced herself that the more Violet and Xander got to know David, the sooner they would love him. It's obvious. David is a wonderful person, and the kids will realize that. David started coming over for dinner and staying overnight. Despite his best efforts, communication was minimal. He bought gifts that were carelessly thrown away after David left. Ursula would find them in the trash, in boxes, unopened. Ursula had even invited David and his parents to visit, calling them Violet and Xander's step-grandparents. To her intense disappointment and the confusion of David's parents, Violet and Xander still refused to communicate. Violet, Xander, I need to talk to you, Ursula said firmly. Her insides were seething. Their behavior was not normal. She had tried very hard to get David involved in the children's lives, but they kept refusing. She was convinced that Gary was encouraging them to behave this way. I need to understand why you are behaving this way towards David. He's been good to you, but neither of you give him a chance. Why is that? Is your father telling you to do this? Dad told us it's your problem, not his. He doesn't want to know, Violet parried. Anyway, we don't like David because of what he did to Dad. I can't believe you're forcing him on us. Violet, David and I have a loving relationship. You have to accept that, Ursula replied irritably. He's going to be a part of your life whether you like it or not. Ursula immediately regretted having said it in that tone of voice. So you're forcing us, Violet said what Ursula had feared. No one's forcing you to do anything. David is going to be part of our family. I just want you to accept him. Let him make you as happy as he makes me, she said almost pleadingly. That's exactly what it sounds like. You're forcing him on us. You need to accept that we don't like him and never will. What about you, Xander? What do you say? You don't like David either? Ursula asked reproachfully. Xander just slowly shook his head in disgust. I just don't want to know him. Ursula couldn't understand the kids. Why were they acting like this? She felt irritated. Her love life with David was suffering because of it. They only had the opportunity to enjoy making love on weekends when Violet and Xander were at their father's house. Things seemed to be much better when she was still married and secretly dating David. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she was that Gary was behind it all. After talking to the kids, she made sure that Gary could see David whenever he picked up the kids or dropped them off. She wanted him to see that she, David, and the kids were a happy family and that he wouldn't be able to come between them. At first, she noticed with satisfaction that seeing David was stressing Gary out, but then he began to seem happier and more relaxed. Out of spite, she tried to send David to Gary's to pick up the kids, but the kids refused to get into David's car. Gary drove them home. All Ursula could count on was for David to move in with them. He had shown much more reluctance than she had expected. Despite the problems with the children, she thought things were good between them. So here they were. David stood at the front door with his suitcase and belongings in his dim car, and Violet and Xander once again insulted him while Ursula comforted him. If Ursula thought that David moving in with them would make Violet and Xander accept him, she was sorely mistaken. The already tense atmosphere in the house had gotten even worse. Violet and Xander refused to socialize with David. Mealtime passed in silence. When David tried to talk to them, Violet and Xander waited in silence until he shut up. Offers to play with Xander were rejected, and offers to teach Violet how to drive were met with a curt, "Daddy teaches me." Any attempts to integrate David into the family were simply disregarded. When Violet and Xander were forced to interact as a family involving David, nothing good came of it. It wasn't long before David started complaining and suggesting that Violet and Xander spend more time with their father. A furious Ursula confronted Gary as he was picking up the kids from his former home. "Gary, you need to talk to the kids about their behavior with David," she told him angrily. "Stop turning them against him." "And what do you want me to do?" Gary shrugged his shoulders. "You brought that asshole into their lives, not me." "I know that's your job. You need to stop, or I'll go to court and shut down all access to Xander and Violet." "You're delusional," Gary laughed incredulously. "You cheated on me with him, and then you complained that they don't accept your asshole lover. Perhaps a relationship born of infidelity wasn't such a good idea after all. Violet and Xander are good kids and can tell right from wrong. They can form their own opinions. They don't need me to tell them anything. They're old enough to decide for themselves. What happens between them and David is not my problem." Ursula glared angrily at her ex-husband and rushed back into the house. The attempt at a vacation had only succeeded because Violet and Xander had left, leaving Ursula and David alone. It had given a boost to their faltering relationship. Gary's indifference to David and Ursula's relationship soon became apparent. During dinner, after Gary dropped the kids off, Violet and Xander began excitedly talking about Callie, Gary's new girlfriend. She had arrived at Gary's house unannounced when Gary was away on work, and the kids were home alone. The chance meeting went surprisingly well. An excited Gary rushed over to see how his kids and girlfriend were talking. After answering a few awkward questions and assuring Gary that Callie already knew about them, how his marriage ended, and that Callie made him happy, the kids hugged her. Ursula was ready to scream in anger as she listened to this. They'd barely spoken David's name after nearly 6 months of trying, but after one unplanned meeting, the kids had welcomed their father's new friend with open arms. Despite the problems, Ursula was determined to prove that her relationship with David was a success. Her use of social media skyrocketed. She posted pictures of her and David hugging and smiling, telling the world how lucky she was. There were pictures of her with her children, too. Pictures of David at children's events, Xander's baseball games, and Violet's soccer games. She tried desperately to portray David as a loving stepfather. Xander's birthday became a point of contention. She held his birthday party at their house and put a lot of effort and expense into it. Not only Xander's friends were invited, but also their parents, siblings, and friends. Ursula also invited David's family and began referring to David's nephews as Xander and Violet's cousins. Much to Ursula's disappointment, Xander insisted that Gary be invited as well, and Gary insisted that he be allowed to contribute to the party. Xander was having a great time. So did Violet, who knew many of the older siblings of Xander's friends. The problem was Gary. Ursula was happy to introduce David to the parents of all of Xander's friends, but Gary had known them for a long time, and they were all anxious to know how Gary was doing. David was becoming more and more sidelined in his own home. Ursula's children had taken a cold shoulder to all of David's family. Xander completely ignored David and refused to be photographed with him. Xander talked a lot to his father, and those at the party began to notice it. In Ursula's opinion, Gary was ruining the party she had so carefully organized. But then David did the most amazing thing. He got down on his knee and proposed to Ursula, presenting her with a ring she had no idea she was buying. Surprised, Ursula couldn't believe it and cried with happiness. The proposal had been applauded, she was sure of it. It really was the happiest day of her life. She insisted that the four of them take a picture. If there were any negative comments, she didn't hear them. She, David, Violet, and Xander were about to officially become a family. If Violet and Xander were unhappy about Ursula's upcoming wedding to David, they didn't show it. It seemed like it was the best move David could have made. Their attitudes toward David changed. They started chatting with him, walking alone with him, and even smiling in his presence. The tense atmosphere of the last few months faded away. Ursula felt that they were a family, something she had dreamed of since she first met David. In her delirium, Ursula saw no reason to postpone the wedding. It was planned for the beginning of the school summer vacation, so Gary could pick up the kids while she and David went on their wedding trip. She wanted to have the wedding as soon as the divorce was finalized. The only thing that took away the wind in her sails was the lack of interest on Gary's part. All she got from him was an impassioned congratulations and a shrug. He really was worthless. Divorcing him had been the best decision she'd ever made. Everything leading up to the wedding had been perfect. The preparations had gone smoothly. All the invited guests were accepted. The wedding day was sunny and warm. It seemed like nothing could go wrong. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, there had been a change in the children. Ursula couldn't understand what was wrong. There seemed to be a nervous excitement in them. It was as if they couldn't wait for something to happen. She assumed it was because of the wedding and the fast-approaching school vacation. That made sense. The wedding was huge, and the children had an important role to play. Ursula wanted her father to walk her down the aisle, but even though her parents had attended the ceremony, they didn't like David. Oh well, then Xander would walk her down the aisle, and Violet should be her maid of honor. Ursula loved going wedding dress shopping with Violet. Xander seemed happy to shop for a wedding suit with David. The wedding was to be held at a nearby resort hotel overlooking the lake. The grounds were beautiful and perfect for photos. Ursula was more excited than she had ever been in her life. During the wedding rehearsal, Ursula noticed that Violet and Xander were only smiling at each other. It was as if they were planning something, and throughout the rehearsal, the happiness they had shown in the previous months seemed to have disappeared. They refused to smile and looked disinterested in what was happening. They had to be told several times to correctly do whatever they were asked to do. They were constantly whispering and laughing together, which made the whole rehearsal difficult. Ursula could feel the anger building up in her, but they had an unexpected protector in David. Relax, they're just kids. They're probably just excited or nervous, he told her. David was right, of course. Violet and Xander had fully accepted him now, so why would they misbehave? The wedding day started off beautifully. Ursula and Violet went to get their hair, manicures, and makeup done. Mother and daughter together, they looked beautiful. The catering was delivered on time, as were the flowers. Right before the ceremony, things went south. Xander went missing. Violet had gone looking for her brother and hadn't returned. Ursula strutted around in front of the hotel's small chapel. All the guests were inside and waiting. David was waiting. Where were the children? She couldn't marry without them. "Where have you been?" she asked angrily when they returned. "Xander, where's your buttonhole?" Xander looked down and smirked. "I must have left it in the room." Violet suppressed a chuckle. "That's not funny," Ursula snarled furiously. "Xander, go get it now!" she shouted. Xander looked shocked, turned, and ran back into the room. Ursula was beginning to feel stressed. Everything had been perfect so far, so she wasn't about to let anything go wrong now. The attendant slipped out of the chapel to see if everything was all right. "My son just forgot his buttonhole," she laughed, rolling her eyes playfully. "Little boy!" Inside, she wasn't laughing. 15 minutes later, Xander returned with the buttonhole in his hand. Ursula buttoned it herself. She adjusted her tie and buttoned the top button on her suit. "Really, Xander, you're 13. You should be able to dress yourself," she told her son irritably. "Try to stay like this for the rest of the day." She took Xander's hand and put a smile on her face. "Okay, Violet, let's go." Violet opened the chapel door and led her mother and brother down the aisle. In her tension, Ursula didn't notice that Violet and Xander weren't smiling. As soon as Ursula reached the end of the aisle, she smiled a happy and excited smile at David, with one lip telling him, "Hi." She kissed both children who sat down in front. The brother and sister began to whisper to each other until the ceremonmeister officiating the marriage ceremony coughed and gave them a stern look that caused everyone in the chapel to laugh. The ceremonmeister began the wedding ceremony. He talked about how radiant Ursula looked, what a happy day it had been for Ursula and David, and how lucky Violet and Xander were to have David join their family. Both Ursula and David smiled at Violet and Xander in response to his words. The children smiled sweetly in return. The friends then stood up and talked about what a wonderful couple Ursula and David were and how perfect they were for each other. Any stress Ursula was feeling receded as she was consumed with happiness. Before the vows were taken, the Master of Ceremonies announced, "I am now required by state law to ask if anyone objects to the union of Ursula and David." There was silence. There were one or two nervous chuckles, but then Violet and Xander jumped up from their seats and shouted in unison, "We object!" Ursula turned around abruptly and looked at the children in horror. The ceremonmeister almost took a step back in surprise, and the guests gasped loudly several times. David just stared straight ahead, shaking his head slowly and laughing incredulously. "Violette! Xander! What are you doing? This isn't funny!" Ursula's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe what her children had done on the happiest day of her life. Violet stepped in for Xander, explaining her objection to the guests. "Most of you are probably wondering why Mom and David are getting married so soon and why they moved in with each other so quickly after she broke up with Dad. The truth is, they dated for almost 2 years, even though Mom was married to Dad. They are cheaters. Mom cheated on Dad with David." "David, is that true?" David's parents asked resentfully. David didn't answer or even turn around. Disgruntled mutterings were heard all around. "Quiet!" Ursula hissed at Violet. Panic was beginning to overwhelm her. This was turning into a nightmare. Most of the guests had no idea about it. Neither she nor David were trying not to flaunt their infidelities. "We hate David. He's the reason our parents split up," Xander continued. "Our dad cried all the time because Mom was with David. We had to live with them while Mom dated David, and then Mom forced him on us. We don't want David to marry Mom. We don't want David to be our stepfather. We don't want to live with David, and we don't want to know David at all." Mommy, if you marry David, we're going to live with Daddy. Violet almost growled at her mother. Violet, what are you talking about? Please don't do this, Ursula pleaded with her children. Turning to David, she pleaded, Just give me a minute. I'll talk to them and put an end to this. David shook his head and said almost calmly to his bride, Hell no, I've had enough of this. I'm not going to live the rest of my life being bullied by these little assholes every day. They don't like me and they never will, and you know what? I don't like them either. I spent too much time and a damn lot of money on them, and all I got was disrespect. I'll only marry you if you live with me, but not with them. Ursula stopped talking and looked at David in a way that made it clear she could never do what he was talking about. I thought so. David headed for the exit. Ursula grabbed his arm desperately. David, we can fix this! No, we can't because there's nothing to fix. That's just the reality of the situation. David walked out of the chapel. Ursula was in floods of tears. Black streaks stained her face with sweat-stained mascara. She froze as she watched her fiancé walk out of her life. Why did you do this to me? She asked her children inconsolably. We hate you for what you did to Daddy, Xander replied coldly. You made us live with the guy you cheated on Dad with? Who does that? Violet asked, looking furious. You've turned Dad's life and our lives into a nightmare. Ursula felt as if she'd been pierced with clarity. All the time she'd been with David, she'd never thought about how it would affect the children. She was sure they would love David. But they never did, and they never would. She had forever ruined her relationship with the two people she loved most in the world, and they might never love her again. Ursula just stared at the children and collapsed to the floor, sobbing. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for you to feel this way. I never thought this would happen. I love you. Please, I love you, she said, reaching out her hands pleadingly in the empty chapel. Violet and Xander didn't approach their mother. Their eyebrows were furrowed, and they too looked upset. Their plot had achieved what they wanted, but they hardly expected to turn their mother into a pathetic and broken figure prostrate before them. Violet, do you have a phone? Grandmother, Ursula's mother, asked softly. Violet nodded and opened her purse to show her grandmother. You and Xander, go back to your rooms and change. Call your father to pick you up. You'll have to stay with him for a while. But how's Mom? Violet asked worriedly. Don't worry about your mother. We'll take care of her. I'll call your father tonight and explain what happened. You can see your mother in a few days when she has calmed down. Ursula's father gently helped his daughter up from the floor and led her out of the chapel. All the way she looked back at her children, who stood somewhat stunned. The grandmother hugged the children. There is no need to apologize. Your grandfather and I never liked David, and what your mother did to Gary either. The consequences of all of this are being realized now, and it will affect her greatly. In the long run, it will be for the best, but things are hard right now. She needs to earn your forgiveness, and she needs to realize that she forced herself on you. She will have to establish a new heartfelt relationship with Gary and learn to respect him as the father of her children again. She did a terrible thing. I doubt he will ever be able to forgive her. Ursula has a lot of self-healing and learning to do. It could take years of therapy. I love you, Violet. I love you, Xander. Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay. Grandpa and I will always be there for you. Now let's go home. The children, along with their grandmother, left the scene of their mother's brutal massacre without even looking back. The end!